Hello, this is SA at 30. It's a podcast brought to you by Brand South Africa, where we're going to look at the country through the lens of growth, potential, and opportunity. I'm your host, Jeremy Maggs, and it is my enviable job to showcase and engage stakeholders, decision makers, and general movers and shakers as we retrace where we come from. We take a view on where we're going and how we are getting there. And it is my singular privilege today to welcome marketing entrepreneur Pat Mahlangu. He's got a list of achievements as long as my arm, but notably, he's the founder and chief executive of Pat on Brands and the youth-run Lerato agency. He's also the brains behind the Youth-Owned Brand Awards, which, if memory serves, was established in 2022. Pat, the very warmest of welcomes. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I have admired you from afar, your entrepreneurial energy, your spirit, and your drive. So let's start with the journey. Where did it begin?
I feel like I'm a bit starstruck at the moment, because here's the man that truly inspired me, particularly when it comes to Pat on Brands, establishing Pat on Brands.
So let's shake hands across the microphone because I have equal admiration for you.
So my journey really started formally at uni. I was doing my third year when I started my first, formal business, which, believe it or not, it was in the PPE space, personal protective equipment, which wasn't popular at that time before. Obviously, we didn't have the COVID pandemic, but it was a business that I started with a friend, and really we were not solving any problem then. It was just an opportunity that presented itself, and we ran with it. But where really marketing is concerned was when I co-founded Varsity TV again in university when I was doing my honors year. And in that time as well, that's when I got started, watching a lot of mags on media. And I really got inspired and learned a lot at the time about what was happening in the industry, And fast forward, then I was like, no ways. If there's a mags on media, there can be a Pat on Brands. And what do Pat on Brands do? We'll give Pats and slaps on brands. So I established a blog where I was reviewing sort of campaigns and what the marketing industry was doing. And it was just a hobby, and I didn't think much of it beyond just it being a hobby. But where things started getting interesting, it was when I started getting, obviously, media invites, when there's product launches and campaign launches, and we start rubbing shoulders with the industry, and a lot of people, would say I'm also like self-made in the industry because I haven't spent a lot of time. I mean, the longest I've worked in a big agency, it was 3 months, and that was it. Then I was on my own and I started my own thing.
And once a person goes out on their own to do something like that, it's very, very difficult to go back into something.
Or should I say formal. I took a brave decision.
A brave decision. Pat, let me ask you this question. So many young students, when they are at university, are thinking about either the work or about socializing or about partners or about the next gig or whatever the case is. Yet you've told me in the space of probably about a year that you had a business, then you started another business. What is in the Pat brain that is driving your need to create some kind of entrepreneurial momentum or project? Because you are a bit of an anomaly. Let's face it.
I think I'm wired differently. I have a lot of ideas, and whenever I come up with an idea, I act on it. It is fear. It is fear. I mean, a lot of people are scared of failing, and more so in our space. Sometimes we fail publicly, and people are like, what did he think he was doing, trying to, rub against the grain. But
so how do you overcome that fear of failure then?
I think more than anything, I have nothing to lose. Especially at that time. Now I have a daughter.
I was going to say, things have moved on. You're no longer at varsity.
Yeah, now I'm no longer at varsity. Obviously, reputation is everything. I'm employing people, that I pay salaries to. So my failure might have a ripple effect on them. So there are those dynamics at play. But back then, I remember my then business partner, when he started Varsity TV, we were clear we're never going to work for anyone, until we had a fallout, and he kept the business, and I was like so bored. I didn't know what to do with myself, and I was doing my final year of my master's at the time. Then I was like, maybe let me get a job. But here's a kicker. So when you get a job and you are someone like me, you get the consistent salary, you get a bit comfy, you get into debt. That was the first thing that happened with me. Within 3 months after getting a job, I bought myself a brand new car.
Classic mistake.
Absolutely, right? And yeah, that kept me trapped for 2.5 years. But even, when I remember when I left my job, the last job I had, I mean, oftentimes they say the right time to leave your work for your business is you must have 3 months salary in your bank account. At least, you can sustain yourself, savings.
Gotta have a business plan.
Yeah, you gotta have.
Yeah.
I had none of it. The only thing I had was, actually I was in debt, which also is kind of a shocker. Every time I go home, my aunt always asks me, like, where do you get this? Because I was raised by my aunt and my uncle. And my uncle is not anything close to my personality when it comes to being, out there and just having this bravado for like. He's very calm and collected. And it's like, she's always asking me, like, where do you get this thing? Because when we did the first year, we launched the awards. So they came over, to attend. And they were just taken aback by exactly what you asked. Like, where do I get this innate ability to just be out there? And
what I would love to do is I would love to take some of your optimism and your energy, and I'd like to bottle it and sell it, and I would allow you to do the branding as far as that's concerned. But I do want to talk to you about South Africa and where we find ourselves.
Gotcha.
So we are marking this year the 47th anniversary of the June 16 uprisings and 30 years of democracy. I think we can say that as we are recording this conversation, you and I have also been watching the inauguration of President Ramaphosa and the installation of the Government of National Unity. But we also know that young people in South Africa face a lot of hardship. Yeah. It's difficult to be a young person right now. And I speak from no experience at all. But what do you think it means right now to be a young person in South Africa? And where do you find that inherent belief in the country that you obviously found in yourself?
The thing, I'm of the view that, South Africa hasn't done good PR work for itself. I grew up in a village, Jeremy. I used to walk 7 kilometers to go to school and another 7 kilometers coming back. And when I got home, I had to go to the well to get water, go to the bush to chop off some wood. My cousins that grew up in the same sort of household today have none of that. We have water in our yard. We have electricity. You can cook using electricity. They have a bus that takes them to school every day. I used to walk that distance. So things have changed for the better for most parts. And of course, if you look at the news, there's a lot of negative news that are being dialed up. I'm first generation university graduate in my household. Now at least there's 2, and the third one is still at uni. So things are getting better, but I think South Africa is not doing a great job from a PR perspective. And even like people were being cynical. When the president talked about the Tintswalo, there are many Tintswalos, and I'm not sort of a how can I put it, affiliated with any political party, but what I'm highlighting is a reality of many South Africans that had opportunities in the past 30 years. However, there are challenges that young people face today. And I think the failure is acknowledging that times have changed and the needs of young people are now different. Someone said to me the other day, one of our sponsors on the awards, she was like, you know what, in our time, when after we graduated, we had jobs waiting for us. Guaranteed. Whether you studied a degree in social sciences or a BSc or a BCom or BCom accounting, you had some sort of opportunity waiting for you. And the reality today, that's not the case. So there needs to be a fundamental shift in terms of how do we use the energy and the ideas that young people have. If you look at developed nations like, for example, America, case in point, whereby almost any idea, no matter how stupid it is, it gets supported, it gets funded. If it fails, it's not the end of the world. Life carries on. But the ones that do succeed will always make up for those that fail. So from a South African context, where we are with young people is that, in my view, and having run, for example, obviously the Yobas now for 3 years, is that what I sense is that sheer lack of belief on the abilities of young people. Because we've seen, the past 10 years from an entrepreneurship perspective, there's been a rise of youth-owned businesses that really only, around this time of the year, which is June as we record this podcast, that's the only time the youth gets on the program. The youth agenda gets, attended to. But then come now, it's going to be July. Then we're going to forget that we had a youth month and we go back to the same old stuff.
So let me put this to you. You can't come onto this podcast and ask questions and not give us an answer. So you've said, and there's nothing that you've said that I disagree with.
Yeah.
But you've said that we need to have a fundamental shift in approach, in philosophy, as far as young South Africans are concerned. And when we're talking about young, we're talking under the age of 40.
Yeah.
So, Pat Mahlangu, what is that fundamental shift that is needed? I'm throwing it right back at you.
Let's embrace the ideas that come from young people. Let there be intergenerational, engagements. Because if you look at, if history is anything to go by, you said we are celebrating 47 years of the Soweto uprising. Those young people then wouldn't have had the courage to do that which they did in that time had they did not have the guidance of the older generation. So what we are lacking is that young people are on one corner and the older experienced generation they're on the other.
So how do you bridge the divide?
Let's invite young people to the table. You see exactly the conversation that you and I, this moment right here, it's exactly what we need.
We should start a political party. Hey, it's too late. The election's over. So I'm wondering what it is. On the one hand, younger people would feel shut out. On the other hand, there's probably a fear from the older generation and just a dismissive arrogance.
Absolutely.
And you've got to find a way of bridging that divide. Easier said than done, sir.
Yeah, and it's quite surprising, because even if we're to take it back to culture, or there's a popular saying in isiZulu that says, "Indlela ibuzwa kwabaphambili." So you ask the way to those who've walked it before. So we are coming to you guys. If someone like now today approaches you and say, "Jeremy, you are a media veteran, and I've watched your work. You've shaped how I think, and can I just get 30 minutes of your time just to bounce off some ideas?" What is the likelihood to say, "Okay, cool, I'll see what I can do. I may not be able to meet you in person, but we can jump on a Zoom call and we can chat."
I can say unashamedly that I do respond to that. But I know many of my generation that don't. So shame on us. And it's not just, it's across all spheres. And 30 minutes of mentorship or guidance or a quick cup of coffee costs nothing, but could yield huge results.
Absolutely. Like, I'll give you an example. Even the Yoba idea, which is the Youth Owned Brands Awards. I had a conversation with Tebe, and I said,
"This is Tebe Ikalafeng."
Yes, the Tebe Ikalafeng, doctor. And I said, I asked him, I remember, I said, it was in December. I said, "Mr. T, I have this idea."
Dr. T.
At the time, that was Mr. T. And I said, "Mr. T, I have this idea, of recognizing youth-owned brands at a grander scale, right? Then he was like, "Oh, interesting." And I was like, "I don't know how to go about doing it." Then he said, I remember exactly what he said to me. He said, "I don't have the answers, but that is going to be your biggest project in 2022. Once you clear on what you want to do, I'm happy to support you in any way I can." And that's where he left it.
So let's pivot then to the Yoba Awards, which are starting now to find real traction among brands.
Yes.
So you've got the idea, you have sought some sage advice from someone who's very well respected in the sector.
Yeah.
How did you start the build?
So obviously then I had to crystallize the idea, then you need resources, to bring an idea like that to life.
What type of resources are we talking about?
Money, you need a venue, you need to get trophies done. You need
Organizers, marketing collateral. Yeah.
Fortunately for me, I could leverage off the resources I had.
But mostly
in the
you needed
agency.
money.
Exactly, which I didn't have at the time. But obviously, again, through his guidance, when you have also how can I put it, the non-financial benefit of having someone of that stature on your side is that if they endorse the idea, you can easily also get support moving forward. When people see me now with Jeremy Maggs, who's renowned in the industry, it does something, to people's psyche. And I was fortunate that, and he said to me, "Pat, I'm going to do the keynote address at your thing. Normally I charge X, but
that's Teddy, yes. But he's right. You've got to put value on your time. So
absolutely, and those are some of the things. And before you know it, we had a very successful show. Sometimes you need people to be judges. You don't have money to pay them.
But let me take you right back to the University of Johannesburg.
Yes.
You talked to me, and this is still resonating in my head, an inherent self-belief in yourself and energy. Those were the two things that you mentioned.
Yes.
You obviously took those two traits and applied them to this particular project.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
Number one, you don't even have a proposal, for example. I had to start with putting together what other people would call a concept document. What is this thing about, and how will brands or sponsors plug in, and even now, 3 years later, you're starting to learn that actually it's not about you or your idea. It's about what the other party stands to benefit, and which really becomes, a challenge, because one would say, "But Pat, this is a great idea for the youth. Why are we not getting support?" And simply because the other people on the other side do not see immediate benefit.
So here's a lesson in life, and I continue to learn that lesson. Every single relationship, to a greater or lesser extent, is transactional, and you've got to take that on board quicker rather than later.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's just that
inherent human nature.
You've got to acknowledge it. And how then can you work to a degree of transactional compromise, which is important?
Sure.
We've kind of got ahead of ourselves here, which is not a bad thing. That's what conversation is all about. Yeah. But what do the Yoba Awards seek to do, and why do you think it adds value then to the South African economy?
I mean, to quote Tebe again, it's going to sound like a Tebe show. He often says, for Africa to rise, it must stop begging, going abroad to the west, to the east, and asking for money. It must stop borrowing money, because whoever borrows you money owns you. And it must stop blaming the past. So if you stop all these three things,
begging, borrowing, blaming,
and start branding, because building brands will have immense benefit to our economy, because brands are the biggest taxpayers if you think about it. So when we build brands, it means that, we're going to have many taxpayers. Taxes, what do taxes do? They build our roads, they build our hospitals, our infrastructure, our healthcare system, and. So ultimately, brand builders are nation builders. So with the Yobas, that's the agenda, to get more young people. And also, you know marketing and branding very well. It's a long-term thing. So when you run a business, it's like short-term, transactional, I do X, you pay me X. So the brand job, it's all about also in the future, when you think of a service or you think of a product, think of me. So when we have that sort of clear focus of long-term, that whatever we are building today is not for our immediate benefit, which I think, unfortunately, from an African/South African context, is something that we lack, because we also see with some of the decisions that our leaders make is for now, for tomorrow. Let's spend now and not, invest in the future. And also, there's a thing, whenever you watch the news, even, you also hosted like a business show. We all know that the future of energy is in the renewables, it's in solar, it's in producing hydraulic or clean energy. And what do sensible companies do? They invest in those spaces so that in the long run, we will, But when it comes to the youth, they say they are the future. But when you say, okay, what investments are you making to the youth? You'll be very disappointed.
As you talk to me about renewable energy, I'm looking deep into your eyes, and I have a funny feeling that that's where you're going to end up next.
Maybe that's not going to make my riches.
maybe that's where you're going to go. Some of the brands that have been successful in the Yoba Awards, what have you learned from them that you can use in your own business journey, but also something that you could impart to other people who are embarking on a similar entrepreneurial journey?
I think more than anything, and someone asked me this question previously, it's not about them only. If you look at the likes of Batu, the legend barbers, already from the beginning, it's about uplifting as we rise. So oftentimes, many successful business owners wait until they hit a certain number and, okay, let's do some philanthropic work. With them from the onset, it's about, let's create jobs for those that are around us. It starts with, let me employ Thabo, because Thabo, we went to high school together. Let's create something. And sometimes, I also see it even in my business. Sometimes it doesn't make sense to hire someone to do a particular job, but you feel compelled enough that you have to give them an opportunity, because if you don't, who will?
It's interesting. You've just jogged my memory about something. Before you and I started doing this podcast, I was talking to someone who is at the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity in the south of France. And I have been there on a number of occasions, and it is an explosion of trends and ideas. And at some point, I really hope that you'll embark on that pilgrimage.
It's on the vision board.
It's on the vision board.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about vision boards in just a moment. But one of the things that emerged from this year, and interestingly in previous years as well, and you've just raised it, about not latching or putting on the good side of the business towards the end, but making sure that it's fully integrated in your operation. It's a thing called good advertising or good branding, or, societal enhancement through brands. And I guess that's one other lesson that South African brands need to perhaps grab with more alacrity, is that they need to see themselves as see themselves as part of the solution. Absolutely. Not to say that they can't point out the problems, but often it's a them and us. And that's it's another bridge that you've got to build, I guess. We talked about the bridge between, young and old. Yes. Maybe there's another bridge between brands and country, which is important. Yeah. Don't know what you think about that. It's a very long-winded way of saying brands need to work harder.
Absolutely. And also, there's a concept that I've, started to exercise in my head. It's called youth washing.
Ooh, do tell. I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, and I think, and just like greenwashing, just like all these other washing things that most brands do, the youth one is one that's really close to me. because we all know that, statistically, the high youth unemployment is a serious issue. It leads to so many social ills. You and I may be fine because we stay where there's high walls and everything else, but we live within a society. When you go to the shops, do you feel safe? When you go for a jog, can you jog at any time? I mean, I'm glad that me, because I'm a man, I can jog at any time I want, but my partner can't. My daughter won't just walk freely on the streets. And that's a result of, obviously, the high youth unemployment, because people say, I need to also make a living. If it means I take from you, I'll take from you because I need to. So the youth washing thing, where I'm going with it is that, there's a lot of talks, in every boardroom, in every public, platform where there's some leader on stage, they're going to mention, we need to,
uplift the youth. I spoke to someone earlier today, a young person, and she said, I am so tired of being told that we need to have skills development. That is such a worn cliche, and that's also part of youth washing. Give some money in terms of skills development, and we're kind of solving the problem, and that's rubbish.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you think about it like this, it's like even with entrepreneurship, whereby many companies run ESD programs, for example. And I've been part of a couple. And every time, I always raise this, and they know me. Because, Jeremy, I have a master's in business management and MCOM, which is sort of an equivalent of an MBA, where I was taught how to look at my financials, how to look at, I even studied the economy at a macro level, how it impacts business and marketing, of course. I mean, I've got an honors in marketing and I studied undergrad and you are part of these programs where they put you in a class and someone stands in front of me and says, and I've also lectured marketing, by the way. Someone stands in front of me and say, here are the 7 P's of marketing.
Yeah.
There's no appreciation of also the strides. Even with the Yobas, you get some sponsors say, oh, let's give a master class to some of your winners. I'm like, master class? What are you going to tell the Yoba Loi that he doesn't know already, having built a business of that magnitude? What are you going to tell Legends Baba, who's now in 5 African countries and employs over 800 people?
It's disingenuous. Completely.
If you say, Legends, we can see you expanding in this African continent. Don't you want to go to Nigeria? See, we can help you open that door. We can fund. Now you're talking, but there's no tailored approach. That's what I'll call it. And that's why you say skills development.
Tick, let's move on. It's nonsense.
Exactly. Then now what you end up having is that you'll have entrepreneurs literally who are just in the business of being in ESD programs. You jump from one ESD program to another and another. You are never growing because all they do is they'll put you in class. Then they tell you about the 7 P's of marketing. They'll tell you, okay, this is how you look at your balance sheet. And then you go to the next one. It's the same content because there's no appreciation that, you being... Because business is like maths. I remember with maths, he used to tell us that you don't read maths. You practice maths. You have to sit down and actually do it. So in business, the best way you can learn business is to do business, not read about it. Yes, it's good to listen to a Jeremy Max show and a Bruce Whitfield show just to understand how top business leaders think. But you have to also
got to do
it, apply it.
Pick up the shovel and start turning the sod. That's important.
Absolutely. Like now you're saying, Pat, any relationship is transactional. Right? I take that. I'm like, it's a lesson. So next time when I need to reframe, how my interactions benefit the other person and
Pat, you mentioned that you'd spent some time in the agency space. Are there any outstanding or big campaigns that you've worked on that you were particularly proud of?
I think the ones that I'm proud of is the ones that I worked on under my my agency.
What?
obviously
Give me a sense.
in collaborating. I mean, obviously, the Yobats is our brainchild. Having started it from scratch to now becoming even a Pan-African platform. I think for us, it's a great achievement. But also another one that I'm a bit. It's a mixed bag, of excitement, but also a little bit of sadness. And hopefully one day it'll. We worked on the brand identity for the Lanseria Smart City. And I mean that's the first post-apartheid, city that was established by, obviously announced rather in 2020 by President Cyril Ramaphosa. So it was a big project for us, and obviously one of national importance, and looking at its historic sort of nature. But obviously what's said about it is that, it is not much movement, in the development of the Lanseria Smart City, but hopefully over time. But it's really a great project to be a part of. And again, I guess now I work on Brand Africa. Since 2020, we've helped them, from a digital perspective. It's those sort of campaigns that don't look glamorous, but in the bigger scheme of things,
they do the job.
Absolutely. They get people to think differently. They get people to appreciate who they are. If you look at, the work around Brand Africa in terms of, pushing the agenda of a brand-led African Renaissance, those are the kind of, and these are, I'd say, campaigns without big budgets, and it's just the passion that, that keeps us doing them. It's really incredible.
I want you to future focus for me very quickly, if you can.
Yeah.
The podcast that we're doing is SA at 30.
Yeah.
And it's been a glorious, difficult, tumultuous, rewarding, frustrating 3 decades. We all know that.
Yeah.
But what or how would you like to see this country, this beautiful country of ours, change in the next 30 years? That's a big philosophical question.
Sure. I think more than anything for me in the next 30 years, it's obviously, we can't change what happened in the past. And I'm of the view that we can always learn from it and never repeat what happened in the past. I was fortunate in 2016 when I was doing, I think it was my first year of my master's. I spent 3 months in Germany. If you visit Germany, they cherish, not cherish, but they embrace their history, where they come from, good or bad, and they protect it, and there are institutions that are centered around that. And people get an opportunity to learn about the history and appreciate. But also what they're very clear about, anything that signals that, hey, we might go back there, it gets eliminated very quickly, And for me, that's a great way of looking at things, that yes, as dark as the history was, but everyone now has a responsibility. Whether you're a layman on the street, or you're a politician in parliament, or you're a CEO in a big multinational company, or you're just an SMME owner, we all have a responsibility to make sure that we don't go back to that undesirable past. If we can look past that, I think South Africa, we all know it's got so much rich heritage, so much diversity, and if we can just embrace that in its fullness, and eliminate anything that seeks to divide us, we'll be one of the best nations. And when I say diversity, obviously not only from a racial perspective, even from an age perspective, let's do away with ageism. If a great idea comes from a young person, let's run with it. If a great idea comes from an older person, let there be resources that will bring that idea to life.
Pat, we're coming to the end of this conversation, and you have given us barrow loads of great ideas. And the whole notion behind the SA at 30 podcast is to celebrate people who are making a real success, who have a belief in this country.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no question that you do. And I wish you well in your journey going forward. What I want to finish with very quickly is we know about Pat conceptually.
Yeah.
But you need to tell us a little bit more about yourself, just to leave us smiling. When I was taught radio many, many years ago, I was told that you can do all the theory and the policy, but you've always got to leave the listeners with a smile on their face.
Wow.
So what do I know about you? I know that you went to UJ.
Yes.
I know that you've got a daughter.
Yes.
I know that you like to jog sometimes at night. And I think you said to me that you might live behind a high wall. Tell me something. Tell me one or two things about yourself that will surprise me.
Sure.
In my business, it's called the curved ball question. We love it, particularly to politicians.
I don't know. I mean,
You bought a car too early. That was the other thing.
Yeah, I got myself into that early. That's a proper curveball.
It's a curve. I'm not letting you go. I got all day, man.
Obviously, I mean the running. If you know the running, you know that I cycle. I do mountain biking.
What do you like to read?
Biographies.
What are you reading now?
Interestingly, I'm reading Genius.
Okay.
Bruce Whitfield's.
Great book, and he's uncovered some great South African success stories.
Yes. So that's what I'm currently. I'm very interested in the stories of mostly the underdogs, like how brands got where they are today. I'm very fascinated by also like our history. When you look at the socio-political space, I'd say it's a privilege because sometimes to be exposed to these things and you don't. Then you then learn to take everything that you see in the media with a pinch of salt. There's a great book that I read about it's called Billionaires, the Rise and Rise of Afrikaner Billionaires. So I'm very fascinated by that, the Afrikaner history and how they got to become big players in business. Because at some point, history has it that they were at the bottom of the barrel when you look at white people, but they somehow find a way to build, institutions that enabled them to somehow now be shoulder to shoulder with the Jews and the English-speaking white people. So that history for me is very fascinating, and it's one that I wish almost every young person can be exposed to and learn about, so that when we look at stuff in the media, we also, are able to understand why certain decisions are being made.
You were incredibly kind to me at the start of this conversation, and you said wonderful words. Let me tell you, as we draw to a close now, that you've been a wonderful guest and that you have inspired me to new thinking, striking out in new directions, and mostly just having the courage and the fortitude to move ahead. Pat Mahlangu, I wish you nothing but the best in your career. And you talked about that book about billionaires.
Yeah.
So at some point when you reach that point, just remember who your friends were.
Got you.
Pat, thank you very much indeed. And this has been the SA at 30 podcast with Brand SA. Thank you so much, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for having me.